Hello, everyone, and welcome to our monthly webinar, Cyber Pearls by the Canadian Institute for Cybersecurity. This is our monthly webinar where we invite guests from both academic and industry background to come here on our webinar and share their expertise and their research with us. If you're somebody who has been following us since quite some time, you would know that we covered a wide variety of topics. We have covered topics like operational technology. We have covered topics like misinformation and disinformation. Before we go any further, today's topic will be cyber resilience in the water sector, threat, risk, and solutions. But before I go on and introduce our special speaker today, just a few housekeeping notes. The length of the webinar would be close to 60 minutes. We'll have the presentation roughly between 30 to 40 minutes, which gives us ample time to have a Q&A session at the end. Let's try to make this webinar as engaging as possible. The Q&A, the Q&A section will be active throughout the webinar. If you have any questions, please, put them in the Q&A section, and we'll make sure that they are answered at the end of it. Your videos and your audios will be muted so that there's no disturbance during the webinar. And last, but definitely not the least, if your colleague, if your friend has missed the webinar, don't worry. The recording of this webinar would be shared with all of you once the webinar is over, and it will also be posted on our YouTube channel. So even if somebody has missed those webinars, they can still go to our YouTube channel and make sure that they see the recording of the webinar. So like I said, today's topic is cybersecurity resilience in the water sector, threat, risk, and solution. And with this, allow me to welcome our speaker today, Mr. Gabriel Agboruche, who's the Executive Director of Operational Technology and Cybersecurity at Jacobs. Gabriel, welcome to the webinar.
Mhm.
Why don't you introduce yourself to our viewers before we head into the webinar?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Gabriel Agboruche. Like Sumit mentioned, I am the Executive Director of OT and Cybersecurity, where maybe for the last decade or so, lived, breathed OT cybersecurity in multiple sectors, including water. And I'm very happy to present this subject to you today as it concerns water, resiliency, and cybersecurity, and even some of the work that we've been doing at Jacobs as it concerns our water customers. So very happy to be here. Should I share out?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Gabriel. Operational technology and in the water sector is very close to, some of our people as well here at CIC. So at this time, the floor is all yours. So why don't you share your screen and, yeah.
Okay. Is my screen sharing?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Very happy to be here. As you mentioned, we're talking about cyber resiliency in water, the threats, the risks, and the solutions. Like he also mentioned, feel free to put any of your questions or comments, and we'll have a 15-minute session or 15 minutes or so session at the end where I'll be able to address all of your questions and comments. So let's go ahead and start. So the flow, right, the pun intended, is going to give us a slight intro of myself. We're going to talk about the anatomy of a water cyber attack. I'm going to talk about cyber threats as it concerns the water sector. And then we can talk about a little bit about what we can do to defend. Not going to belabor you with a list of hardening checklists for all of your OT assets, but we're going to get into some of the top most critical items that we are going to focus in on. So let's go. Who am I? My name is Gabriel Agboruche. Like I mentioned, in a past life, actually how I got my introduction into cybersecurity was when I was a nuclear instrumentation and controls engineer here in Detroit, Michigan, where I'm at now, not too far outside of here at a local utility. I was actually working at a nuclear plant. As you see, I have the hard hat and everything there. That's what I would go in every single day until a virus or some malware hit a Middle Eastern nuclear facility called Stuxnet, right? So Stuxnet hit that environment. It caused shockwaves across commercial nuclear to the point where little nuclear plant was affected, and I started doing a lot of the cybersecurity projects. So that's early in my career. And then on the right, I'm a musician, right? They always connect engineering with the musician, with the numbers and accounting and everything. Also a YouTube content creator. I make cybersecurity content on YouTube with a YouTube channel called Struggle Security, where I'm normalizing struggling in cybersecurity. That's a whole nother aside. But I'm also a father and a husband. And like we mentioned before, executive director of OT and cybersecurity here at Jacobs, where we have multiple lines of business. One is our design and build business, where we focus in on architecting and designing secure networks and architecture, mainly within OT environments like SCADA and DCS type of environments. We also have an operations and maintenance business where we're there patching and doing firewall configurations and making sure our customers don't have downtime with their OT assets. And finally, we have another piece of our business which focuses on OT cybersecurity, where we do assessments, whether pen testing, vulnerability assessments, and we really focus in on a lot of really finding the badness or finding the gaps before the bad guys find the gaps. And my responsibility is that heavily of strategy and sales within our organization. But I am a practitioner at heart. Even though I'm in a leadership role here, I'm a cybersecurity practitioner at heart. And through the presentation, you might see more and more of that. An anatomy of a water cyber attack. Let me set the stage here. You are a operator at a water facility, right? You are just going along in your day-to-day business, and you're making sure that operations are going along smoothly. System health is there. All of your human machine interfaces are giving you the readings that you need. And you're making sure that the processes at your water plant are going along well. But unknowingly, there's a cyber attack occurring, where we're starting off here at one, and kind of the steps here align with the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain here. So number one is reconnaissance. Your adversary is already engaging in understanding your environment. Where we're starting with the one is the adversary is identifying vulnerable water treatment facilities with internet exposed Unitronics, PLCs, and HMIs. These are programmable logic controllers, PLCs, and HMIs, human machine interfaces. These are control system assets that, in this case, are exposed to the internet. Number two, your adversary is not only have they discovered these in the reconnaissance phase, but they're starting to weaponize them by developing exploits to compromise the PLCs. There are default passwords that are on these devices, and insecure remote access. Where when I say insecure remote access, I'm talking no multi-factor authentication. Right? You only take one step in order to gain access to these devices remotely. And they're potentially even exploiting or utilizing post-exploitation frameworks like that of Metasploit to be able to understand how to interact with these devices that they discovered. You're still at your desk, right? You're still at your engineering workstation, going along in your regular business, and you're not understanding that there is a cyber attack occurring. Number three, delivery and exploitation. The adversary is developing exploits in order to automate the process of finding more of these internet-connected devices. They're searching all over the internet for more of these devices, and they're creating what you call payloads or malicious type of packages or malicious items to deliver to these PLCs and HMIs. That's what's occurring right now, and they're utilizing protocols like Telnet, which is common within OT, SSA, Secure Shell, which is also common, and they're utilizing this in order to exploit and log into these devices. And now you might also be noticing changes in your system. This is when you're like, whoa, something weird is happening. Because the actors in this case, when they're delivering and accessing these devices, the actors are erasing original ladder logic files. That's the program or the files that are loaded into PLCs. They're also defacing human machine interfaces. This is what you're saying as an operator, the readings of pressure, temperature, all of these things, but the adversaries are defacing these assets, these HMIs, and rendering them unreadable by the operators. At this point, this is causing disruptions at your water treatment plant. So as you see, 1, 2, and even 3 are starting to occur, right? The steps. And now you're just being informed of something weird is happening. Number 4, the adversary desires to maintain their connection into this environment with a C2 infrastructure, a command and control infrastructure, where they want to maintain control over these compromised PLCs and HMIs to send further commands so that they can dig their claws deeper into your environment. And then number 5, they're going here and they're accomplishing their actions and objectives, where they potentially have modified water pressure and flow controls, potentially causing equipment damages because margins have been overtaken, and then overall creating disruptions within your water treatment plant. This is the anatomy of what a cyber attack would look like within a water treatment facility. But the thing about it is that this isn't just theory. This isn't just, creativity, but this has actually happened, right? CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency here in the U.S., this activity was attributed to the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, or Cyber Avengers as their name, right? There were 4 different waves of cyber attacks that occurred within these environments. And what happened is that the result was there were at least 75 of these internet connected devices compromised, and at least 34 in the water and wastewater sector in the US. This isn't just theory, this is happening. And if you look at when the notice was given out, this says December 18th, 2024. This is recent, and this is occurring right now. This isn't just to scare everybody, but this is to let organizations and people know that this activity is occurring right now. Let's get into some threat overviews, right? We want to understand more about what these threats are and understand what are these current activities and what to look out for. To just give a background definition of a threat, because there could be different definitions, but according to NIST, it is the potential to adversely impact organizational operations, assets, individuals, and nations, right? It's the overall definition there as it concerns what a threat is. And starting off with the first one, and we covered that in the anatomy of a cyber threat, or the anatomy of a cyber attack, is this is the APT battlefield. Did a presentation earlier last year where we have recognized that private organizations are becoming a part of the overall battlefield, the geopolitical cyber battlefield that has been occurring. Nation states, organizations that have motivation, they have funding, they have the time in order to carry out these cyber attacks from nation to nation, group to group, right? So they target, a lot of times, internet-facing OT systems to disrupt industrial processes and potentially compromise safety. The second one here that we're going to talk about as it concerns one of the most recent threats, and there's more threats other than these 3, I think these are just the most critical, is that ransomware is utilizing OT as its almost playground for modern ransomware, where a lot of times what we're seeing is that attacks that have been originating in the IT or information technology environment, where there might be email servers, there might be data centers, right? It might originate there in IT environments, and they're increasingly pivoting into OT. Because if you all have ever dealt with a ransomware incident, what happens is that ransomware looks to just spread. It spreads as far and as wide as possible, encrypting data, encrypting systems in order to cause some level of disruption. And this is particularly, I guess, dangerous within OT, because OT in many cases functions with clear text protocols, right? There isn't much encryption within OT. So when things are starting to become encrypted, shares and communication protocols and all types of data is becoming encrypted, it makes it difficult for operations to go on regularly. So this is very much so impactful within a water and wastewater facility. But then the next one is the new hacker tutor, right? Artificial intelligence or large language models. One thing that we've been saying is that adversaries are utilizing AI in order to fill in a lot of those knowledge gaps. AI-enhanced threat actors can rapidly learn about these OT systems vulnerabilities in order to cause more disruptions and accomplish their malicious goals. And I think I want to take you kind of step through what that would look like. And I did a little bit, like I mentioned, I'm a practitioner myself, done many of these cyber assessments and have been involved in many OT incident response engagements. So I kind of just went to the internet and started the process of, hey, what would an adversary do utilizing artificial intelligence in order to accomplish some type of malicious goal? So let's take a step through here with AI assisting adversaries in this environment. So this is the first place that many of us OT practitioners go when we're looking at internet connected systems, is within Shodan, which is a website that gives you information about internet connected systems, right? It's almost like the Google for internet connected systems, whether it's IoT and in this case, many OT systems. So here, as you see, I put in a query or a search field with HMI, right? Human machine interfaces, and then utilizing the VNC protocol, where VNC is a commonly used, right, administrator product where process engineers and people can remotely access systems and take control of them utilizing VNC. So when I did this query here, I found 98 results, as you can see here to the right, and it's in different places and these are some of the ports. But let's see what else I was able to find in this process. I found various human machine interfaces. I would say this: I don't know what any of these HMIs are. Many cases I've dealt with like Emerson and Rockwell, but this stuff, I don't know what these are in particular, and neither does the adversary. I'm just kind of stepping through the process of what an adversary would see if they're starting off there at Shodan, but also utilizing AI to give them more information about these systems. So, product chilling mode, I don't know, something to the right, I think that's in Japanese. At the bottom, I believe that's Korean. On the right, dairy cool. No idea what these systems are, but we're going to look and see how AI can fill some of those gaps. So I just chose one of these, right? I chose one of these and I went to ChatGPT and I asked them randomly, hey, I found this online. What is this? This is one of those HMIs that we saw from Shodan and no idea what it is. Let's see what ChatGPT says. So they give some information here. It says that this appears to be a human machine interface screen, right, for an industrial chilling system, likely part of a process cooling or refrigerator system. They're giving me all this information just merely from a screenshot of an internet connected asset. It also breaks down some of the key elements or some of the key components to what that screenshot showed. It showed chilling power in kilowatts, right? So glycol flow, I'm not very familiar here, right? I'm not a chemical engineer, I'm an electrical engineer. So glycol inlet and outlet temperatures, product inlet and outlet, bore water. I mean, it's giving all various amounts of information and giving context to what this is. This is really helping to fill my knowledge gap from what I've seen from that HMI to what's actually happening. Let's take this a step further. Because ChatGPT, it's so generous, right? It says, so it even asks what this system does. It says that it cools a liquid, and it says possibly in food and beverage, pharmaceutical, industrial manufacturing processes. Also says a plate heat exchanger, compressor, right? And glycol circuit regulate temperatures to maintain the desired cooling effect. And it even asks, let me know if you need more details. Again, adversarial mind. Yes, I would want more details. This is me typing, yes, give me more details about the vendor and product version. Because as we saw before with the anatomy of the attack, if you know the vendor, the product version, you can do more research into how you would go into compromising this type of system. And it mentioned that, hey, the vendor is the Vericool branding, it says here. And then Virage cooling system potentially is the manufacturer. So going further, one step further, and this is where I stopped, is that I asked it, could I send commands directly from the screenshot I provided? Meaning that, can I interact with the human machine interface to send commands to cause some type of action to whatever system this is monitoring? And there are some HMIs that have the capability of control in OT systems. So good news, right? No, you cannot send commands. This is from ChatGPT directly from the screenshot you provided. The screenshot is just a static image of an HMI screen, meaning it does not have interactive functionality. But it doesn't stop there. Like I said, ChatGPT is so generous. It says, however, if you had access to the actual HMI system, you could send commands using one of the following methods. And it gives 3 different methods here. And that's where I said, yikes. Because it says one, physically, if you have access to the touchscreen, another one, remote access via SCADA or VNC, right? And we know that this is VNC, so there might be some methods to interact there. It goes further. It says if the HMI is connected to a SCADA system, supervisory control and data acquisition system, which is just short for, well, it's a long form of a type of OT system, whether it's the vendors is Ignition, Wonderware, or WinCC, you can send commands remotely, right? But then number 3 is wild because it says, you know, if you want to go even further by looking at the communication protocols like Modbus, Profinet, or Ethernet IP, it even created a Python script for being able to interact with the HMI or potentially PLC that's controlling that process. So this is where I stopped and I said, wow, this really helps to fill that gap or bridge that gap between an adversary that doesn't know anything about that screenshot, anything about those HMIs, to seeing, hey, they can actually, this translates into code or some method of interacting with these systems. This is the future, or I think the what threats are occurring right now for not only OT systems, but more specifically water and wastewater systems. So I don't want to leave you at, hey, you know, scary, scary, scary. Bad guys can do this, bad guys can do that. These are the threats that we need to look out for, whether ransomware, internet connected systems, or AI assisted threat actors. But what can we do to defend? And I don't want to give a laundry list here, but I want to give 3 of the most critical ones. And this comes from CISA and other publications out there, starting with number 1, to reduce the exposure to publicly facing or untrusted environments, namely the internet. Now, we, just like we saw from the example from the human-machine interfaces, these are internet-connected systems, internet-connected human-machine interfaces, and potentially programmable logic controllers that can be accessed, modified, and changed in order to create some type of action. So the action here is access to your network or assess your network connectivity of your systems, right? Understand where all the connections are. I've been on multiple assessments where at times organizations don't really have the best understanding of their internet connectivity blind spots. They think that if my system is not directly connected to the internet, then there's no way for the bad guys to get in. You get this idea of a air gap system where they aren't taking account of, hey, we have vendors and third-party organizations that come in to service our OT assets all of the time. They might be patching, they might be updating systems. That's a break or a bridge for adversaries to potentially come into your OT environments, even though there isn't any persistent IT or internet connectivity there. So the action right there, right? Assess your network connectivity, understand all of your gaps, all of your attack vectors or your attack surfaces, evaluating your perimeter as well. One firewall is not enough anymore, right? Having a firewall between the internet and your OT environment is definitely not enough. There were times where I would do an assessment and I'm sitting down with the customer, we're walking through, we're trying to understand what are those perimeter defenses that are in place. And they mentioned that, hey, there's times where we have services that are done on our systems. So we have remote connectivity from this vendor into our environment. And then I'm asking like, hey, how often is that connectivity there? How often are you allowing that? They say, hey, we just allow it in the morning, we cut it off in the afternoon, and we go from there. So they're telling us that, hey, the adversary has a morning to afternoon gap in order to get into the environment. There's a time period there because it's directly connected to the internet for vendors to come in, but adversaries also have that same pathway. We had them open up their firewall logs of access, and there were systems that were attempting to get into their environment from during those time periods. Like I mentioned before, adversaries are continually scanning the internet with automated tools in order to understand where those vulnerable systems are. So having that gap in your perimeter can really cause a disruption or give the adversaries the opportunity to get into your environment. And like I mentioned before, understanding all your entry points into your water systems, even physical, even physical. So the goal here is to minimize exposure as much as possible. We understand that with operations, you might need additional, right? You might need some additional access points for you to be able to operate efficiently, but you want to minimize those exposure points as much as possible. Another one is conducting regular cybersecurity assessments. Get a third party in there in order to do services like penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, threat hunting, or just overall proactive services that allow you to understand what your gaps are before the bad guys might be able to exploit what those vulnerabilities are. It's very common, and then I know that it's very scary for there to be pen testing or some type of proactive security service within your OT environments, like a water and wastewater environment. I've been there, right? Had the hard hat on. We want to keep IT as far away from our OT systems as possible because they don't understand them. They don't understand these environments. They're trying to do patch Tuesdays for all our Windows systems when you can't patch like that in OT, or they're trying to put in some type of they're trying to put antivirus on a compact Windows HMI system where it's not even compatible to modern antivirus software. Or even sometimes antivirus will block things that doesn't need to be blocked, that's necessary for operations to continue in OT. There are all types of things that IT doesn't necessarily understand about OT, but you still need that tailored understanding of what are my security gaps in my OT environments with assessments like these, where the pen test or vulnerability assessments. It's very important because what I've seen, and I've been a part of different incidents, right? I didn't mention this before, but I've done a lot of OT incident response engagements, meaning that when a factory plant has been hacked, or when a large manufacturing organization, whether automotive or it's like a robotic arm got hacked, they would bring myself and different teams in that I've been a part of to be able to address what those incidents are. And in many cases, when an adversary gets into OT, it's game over, right? There aren't a lot of additional security layering within OT because they haven't been assessed. These environments haven't been evaluated for their security gaps. So commonly within OT, you're using shares like SMB version 1, right? That's I guess an antiquated communication protocol for file sharing, right? But ransomware can run ravage in that type of environment with that protocol going on, right? Or there might be no type of access control, right? Network access control. Say, for instance, a vendor comes into your environment, they might have some malware on their laptop. They plug into an Ethernet port within your operations center, and boom, that malware spreads over. No barriers, nothing there to stop malware and the bad guys from doing what the bad guys do. So I say that to say, being a part of many OT cybersecurity engagements, if there is additional layering by understanding what those gaps are, then that can assist organizations in being able to address what those cybersecurity issues are. So conduct regular cyber assessments to understand where your gaps are. And finally, develop and exercise your incident response plan and recovery plans. In many cases, organizations have incident response plans that are in place, but they don't include OT or your water systems, your pump systems, your PLCs, your SCADA servers. They many times don't include those into your incident response plan. So making sure you having those developed, documented, but not only that, you want to exercise that incident response plan in order to prove your effectiveness of dealing with OT incidents in your water systems, right? And I think that another thing that I had in bold there was the recovery plans too, because you don't only want to deal with what happens when a cyber incident occurs. You can have that together, but really the overall goal is getting things back up and running. You want to recover from the incidents too. So not only having the plan of what happens when a cyber incident occurs, but you also want to have a plan to recover. What those recovery plans are, so you can have tabletop exercises for that of incident response, but also tabletop exercises for recovery processes with your team, because you want to get things back up and running, especially seeing that water is so much of a critical infrastructure for all countries around the world. So you don't want to leave recovery outside of the plans. And an example of a recovery process or an action would be, manually operate as the third party procures and configures replacement devices. So this is what we can do to defend. Number one, understanding how your systems are exposed to the internet or untrusted networks or untrusted environments, understanding all of those attack vectors and that threat surface. Number two is conducting regular cybersecurity assessments. Again, I know it's scary as an engineer, a practitioner myself, but it's extremely important in understanding what your gaps are so that you can understand what that risk is to your organization, and also developing exercises for incident response, or not only exercises, but a plan, but also exercising that plan in the form of tabletop exercises for when a cyber attack happens, but also for the recovery process as well. So that is really the end of my information, but I want to leave my contact info here because we've been heavily involved. Jacobs has been heavily involved in assessing, 30, 40, coming up on 50 or so of these water and wastewater facilities. And if you all have any questions about what that looks like, desire more advisory type of services, maybe even consulting services, feel free to reach out anytime. These are contact information here. And we can definitely give more context to what that is and helping with some of that water and wastewater issues and cybersecurity pain points for your organization. So want to open it up for questions at this point, but hopefully this has been very valuable to you, right? Understanding what the anatomy of attack looks like, taking it step by step. Also understanding what some of those threats are, right? Ransomware, understand internet connected systems, but also how AI could be assisting adversaries in getting into your OT systems today. And also looking at some of those protections or those defenses, top critical defenses, understanding what your attack vectors are, understanding that you need to have cyber assessments, but also preparing for those incidents in the event that a cyber incident occurs. I think that those are all extremely important. And very happy to be presenting to you today. And I'll go ahead and turn it back over to our organizers for any questions or concerns.
Thank you. Thanks, Gabriel.
Mhm.
You had my interest at, nuclear engineer and musician. Very interesting
Mhm.
combination, and good to understand, the susceptibility of our water plants. With this, we'll now move on to our Q&A session, and it seems, Kwasi has a question. So Kwasi, you have the
Mhm.
access of audio, so why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Thanks, Sumit. Gabriel, thank you for the presentation. It's very
Thank you.
insightful. It's always good to get insight from the professionals in the game.
Mhm.
So the first question that I wanted to ask was that I know this has to do with, as you mentioned, if there's a compromise into OT's game over, right?
Mhm.
So would it be very interesting for there to be, for example, a device that can actually, or a piece of code that can actually
Mhm.
make these microcontrollers? For example, you're looking at Purdue model, right? Level
Mhm.
1. So would it be very interesting to have or make these PLCs as the last line of defense? So as in case you
Yeah.
have any kind of attack coming in, would that be something that would be really acceptable by the
Mhm.
market?
It can be. So there are hardening standards for PLCs. There are some that have multi-factor authentication capabilities that can be considered a security control that can thwart some threat actors from getting in. I mean, or just changing the default passwords. But really, when you look at PLCs, they have a particular function that is not really security. So adding a lot of security features to a PLC can maybe harbor or I guess hinder some of this actual intent, if that makes sense. In many cases, what we found is that segmenting or segregating those programmable logic controllers from a network perspective has been the go-to, I guess, security control for PLCs. So you might take these PLCs and put them into a virtual local area network. And then you might put a firewall somewhere between that PLC network and other systems that might have less security there, only allowing certain protocols to go in and come out. That's a lot of times where I've seen the security around the PLCs, that last line of defense. But like I mentioned, there are some security features, but adding more, I think that can hinder what some of the intent of the PLC to be. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, that does. Sumit, can I ask some more?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, okay. So now, usually there's a talk of having encryption happening, right? Be it across various levels, maybe horizontally and vertical. Now, given the resource constraints that you have within the system, is it really feasible to implement that?
No. Encryption in OT is just like it's so interesting because doing OT incident response engagements, literally going in there and looking for where the malware is. One of the ways that we found malware is looking for encrypted traffic. We look for encrypted traffic in order to identify what the malware is because encrypted traffic is not common to OT.
Yeah.
In many cases, you need FTP, right? File transfer protocol, unencrypted. You need Telnet in order to interact and to be able to service these different devices. These are just ingrained into a lot of the systems because a lot of them are old, right? You got 15, 20-year-old systems that are utilizing that protocol in order for operations to occur. So in its current conception, so probably future case, yes, right? As systems get upgraded and updated, encryption most likely will be a part of the game. But at the moment, encryption in OT just is something that's more of a computational burden for these systems, where they're just using unencrypted protocols in order to operate.
Okay. So now regarding, I already mentioned the Purdue model. So I'll just double back to the Purdue model. I know you've had experience running these assessments in various plants. The question is, how often is the Purdue model really practiced? Is it a lot of the time organizations keep their architectures really flat or in a ways?
Yeah, flat networks are still very, very common. So one of those assessments have been pen tests, right? OT penetration tests. And in many cases, we are evaluating the ability to move from IT to OT. If we can move from IT to OT, like I mentioned, that's game over. When you're asking about the Purdue model it's here and there in some more mature organizations, the Purdue model, but also the Purdue model isn't really security focused. It's more of a representation of what a network should look like or a network architecture should look like. So kind of a Purdue model with IEC 62443. That's a standard too that goes into conduits and zoning, which kind of gets more into the security features where Purdue model might lack. So I would say there's more frameworks implemented into more mature organizations where these assessments are. But at the moment, you still have early organizations like in water isn't that mature, so you will still see a lot of these flat networks with not even Purdue model implemented.
Okay.
Yep.
So now, talking about legacy systems, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So now the thing with legacy systems, I know that some of them have been in existence for 20 years, and usually nobody really wants to touch them,
Right.
Because it could go boom. Now, if you're looking at the next 20 years, what are the odds, or what are the chances that these devices will be replaced, especially when in trying to acquire these devices or newer devices is very, very expensive to do so?
Yeah. And many of these organizations are doing, or ones with the funding, ones with the motivation, also organizations that have been hit with cybersecurity incidents. They're doing, a lot of times you'll see it as like a modernization project. Well, they're upgrading a site, implementing things like cloud. They're doing zero trust architecture to some degree. They're utilizing more, I guess, modern methods of intrusion detection and threat identification. You see these in some organizations, again, those that are very well funded, very large, very kind of forward thinking. But at the same time, I mean, if you're talking water and wastewater, that can be at times few and far between, because many of them are municipalities, these are cities, these are states. So within water, you're seeing less of that, but you are seeing some modernization projects happening for larger organizations within OT as a whole.
Okay. And I would say my last question.
Yeah, you got a lot of questions.
I do.
You might need to send me an emails. We can set up another chat. But yeah.
Yeah. I promise this is the last one. So this actually has to do with ransomware. Usually, yes, there's always these recorded ransomware available, announced. Do they usually happen within the OT level, or does it happen within maybe the enterprise facing part of the organization?
So I think it goes back to one of your previous questions about flat networks. If it's a flat network, it's everywhere. I've been a part of an incident where ransomware hit and they got to replace everything. I mean, literally everything. I mean, PLCs are becoming bricked because ransomware is just looking to spread and encrypt. So as a result, it bricks things like PLCs or HMIs, right? These things become inoperable where they need to be replaced. So in those cases, yes, in flat networks, ransomware hits everything. But when things are more segmented, you've seen some type of activities where organizations will shut down their OT environment if they're noticing ransomware in IT. So as a precautionary measure, you'll see OT affected, not necessarily by the ransomware, but kind of as a result of ransomware in IT, so they can prevent any potential spread into OT. That's what happened with the Colonial Pipeline incident, right? That was there was no ransomware discovered within OT, but ransomware was definitely within IT systems. So yes, things like that can happen for sure.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thanks. No more questions from me.
Indeed. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Kwasi. Your excitement since the topic is in the OT is highly encouraging. And thanks for those questions. We'll now move on to other question that we have received as a part of this Q&A. Okay. So Gabriel, I'll read this question to you. How can some of the smaller utilities with limited cybersecurity budget strengthen their defenses against sophisticated cyber threats?
So I think some of those kind of critical items can be done with some advisor. So here, let me take a step back here. It is difficult for those organizations without the budget, without the capabilities or the knowledge or the resources in order to implement some of these advanced cybersecurity things. But the thing about it is that some of them are very low cost as it concerns like a small assessment, right? Them getting maybe a government entity to come in and assist. There are grant programs I know in the US. I'm sure that there are some also in Canada as it concerns critical
Yeah.
infrastructure grants and funding in order to assist. So I think that that's a first step there. And I think a second step would to be invest in some smaller type of services where an organization is coming in to give, a small assessment to say, hey, these are the top critical things that you need to focus on in order to help with your cyber defenses. Because in many cases, like the gentleman was mentioning, Kawasi, like flat networks, that's not a super expensive thing to do segmentation in your environment. That's not extremely expensive, but it's very effective in thwarting some of the activities of the adversary. So I would say number one is going towards your local governments in order to assist with grants or assist in services. And number two, invest in smaller services, things that are not high ticket items. But at the same time, you are going to have to communicate that to leadership. So I think that needs to be in there as well. So presentations like this, have your leadership understand what these threats are and what the effects are to operations, what the effects are to your critical systems, and getting some small budget to do some type of critical assessment in their environment.
Agreed, Gabriel.
Mhm.
We certainly agree on the fact that these assessment
Mhm.
to discover some of the vulnerabilities goes a long way.
Mhm.
And with this, we'll move on to the next question.
Sure.
Given the increased convergence of IT and OT, what are the
Mhm.
biggest challenges in securing operational technology environments?
The biggest challenges in securing biggest challenges. I think it so starts off with that segment. So knowledge of what's going on. Many times we're talking to customers that don't really have a lot of understanding of the effects of what a cyber incident can have on their organization. The news is always blaring with, hey, they've been hacked or they've been hacked. Sometimes things are not even real, right? There's a lot of FUD out there about what cyber attacks can do. An organization might be trying to sell services or something, or they might be trying to sell a product where it can almost be like some type of quote unquote fake news about what cyber is doing to these environments. But I do think number one, organizations need that knowledge to, hey, what can cyber do or what cyber effects can occur within my organization? So I would say one is having some type of cyber champion within their OT environments. That's a challenge, and that needs to be communicated, and there needs to be some level of education there. And I think maybe number two is organizations really understanding what those gaps are. We've run into customers who have said that, hey, we're good. We got our cyber together. We got everything together because they at times have been kind of I guess kind of a lot of internal banter as it concerns where they are from a cyber perspective. Getting an outside perspective, getting an outside understanding, even from maybe a sister or a peer organization as it concerns what cyber is, I think that can really help them understand that, lack of a better term, that maybe their baby is ugly, right? Their OT baby is ugly, or they might have some blemishes there, right? So getting an outside opinion is, I think, another one of those challenges there for organizations that are managing these OT systems. So I think those are the two that I think they're very important. Yeah.
I would certainly remember the phrase, maybe
Hmm.
the babies are ugly.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
we move on to the next question, and which is, are PLCs really compromised with the malicious firmware, or are they just reprogrammed in journal by the adversaries?
So in the Cyber Avengers example, they actually uploaded malicious firmware versions to those PLCs. Now, noted, this is a very sophisticated threat actor. There are several different threat actor countries that are well known for their capabilities. That of Iran, North Korea, Russia, China, right? Those are like the big players as it concerns capabilities in adversarial capabilities, right? So this is a very well funded, very well educated, and very knowledgeable about those systems. So in that case, from that threat actor, yes. But in other cases, in many cases, you're not seeing threat actors or just the day-to-day hacker modifying PLC or uploading malicious PLC payloads to devices. At most, you might see them accessing them, like it said too, like disabling different functions. I mean, it's so interesting because I think years ago there was a focus in on how to compromise the PLC, how to change the lock. If you gain access to an engineering workstation, which is what engineers use to program PLCs, you've won. You don't need to reprogram a PLC. You can shut it off, you can disable it, you can erase different functions. So I think the normal hacker with access to an OT network can affect a PLC without having to change any logic or without having to upload malicious payloads or anything. If they gain access to the network and the Windows systems or the devices within the network, they win, right? They can win in that case. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting, Gabriel. Now the next question is, I know the parts of it you had already covered in the slide, but I'll
Sure.
still, I'm sort of read the question for you to see if there are parts which are not covered.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share an insight on how global threat trends are evolving in the water sector, and
Yeah.
what emerging risk we should be aware of?
I do think, like I mentioned, I think the AI assisted adversary, I think that's kind of something that's going to be emerging more and more. I think from a lower level, we've seen phishing attacks be more effective based upon the utilization of artificial intelligence in creating more convincing phishing text or phishing pretext. That's one thing. But for the water sector, I think that it's been getting so much more, I guess, press because more systems and more environments are being compromised. I mean, there's been several even this year, and government agencies have started to put out more and more information about what the water sector is. And I think based upon the maturity, I do think that they need to kind of start to catch up more with where maybe energy and power is. Or right years ago there was this, oh, hack the grid, can the grid be hacked? I think the newest, I guess the hotness in OT cybersecurity is water. So hopefully that makes sense. So I think the emerging threats are there with additional tooling like artificial intelligence being used to bridge that knowledge gap and ability to compromise. And I think that's the primary one. And that organizations can just do basic things, right? Network segmentation, hardening systems by changing passwords, implementing multi-factor authentication for virtual private networks, not exposing OT assets to the internet. I mean, vetting and scanning vendor laptops and flash drives before they interact with different assets that they're managing. I mean, I think that there are emerging threats, but I think that there are still just basic things that organizations can do from a cyber hygiene perspective in order to really fight against a lot of what adversaries are doing today.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
We're just coming to the end of the webinar, but we still
Mm-hmm.
have a few minutes to go. I think we can take one more question, and that will be our last question for
Sure.
today's webinar. What role do the public-private partnership play in enhancing the cybersecurity resilience, particularly in the critical infrastructure sector like water security?
Can you repeat the question one more time? I got
Yeah.
pieces of it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What role do the public-private partnership play in enhancing cybersecurity resilience, particularly in the critical infrastructure like the water sector?
Mm-hmm. I think that they have to work together. right? I think
Mhm.
public and private, right? Public has has a critical mission to keeping things running, and right, but in many cases they're under resourced, right? So they might have an IT guy that manages these systems, and in many cases the OT folk within public sectors are not wearing a cybersecurity hat. So I think the private sector needs to assist in those in cases where they might need to come in to give some type of outside understanding of where they are from cybersecurity. So I think that they need to play together. There needs to be assistance there, and I think that in many cases, um, government really needs to assist in that collaboration. I know that there are efforts out there, things on kind of there are ISACs, right? Information sharing organizations where public and private sectors organizations can get together to share information, share knowledge, give notable cyber insights to what's happening to organizations. So I think that organizations should invest there within ISACs and user groups and attending conferences like these to get that knowledge out there. Or so yeah, I think that one, the government needs to assist in that public-private collaboration, but at the same time, organizations should join things like information sharing organizations for water cybersecurity too.
Interesting, interesting.
Hmm.
Thanks, Gabriel.
Hmm.
With this, we come to the end of today's webinar, and I must say, thank you for those invaluable insights and for sharing your expertise with us today. Your deep knowledge and your practical recommendation has given us a lot of understanding of cybersecurity opportunities and challenges. Especially in the water. Infrastructure. To our audience, thank you all for joining us today and engaging with all the questions. We hope you find today's sessions very, very informative and thought provoking. If you have any additional questions, please you can always get in touch with Gabriel. His email is there on the screen, or please reach out to us as well at the Canadian Institute for Cybersecurity. And if you're somebody who has been, following our webinars very actively, please go and follow our LinkedIn page where we post the announcement of these webinars very frequently. So once again, thank you, Gabriel, and thank you, thank you for being here. Take care, and we'll see you guys next time.